The intro I played was the M1 rack. I just used the wave station to control this rack. Though the big electronica sound I got is more common to the wave station than the M1. So this video will cover setups, how to get sounds you wouldn't expect from the M1 by using the new Off the Matrix M1 patches. The new patches were saved as a program file, so that way, if you have multi-timbral setups in your M1, you will be able to use the new patches with your old setups. Many of the patches rely on effects that reproduce the settings of vintage analog synths, like this Super JX Strings patch. It sounds so good because the modulation settings of the M1's chorus effect duplicate the chorus on the old Roland synths. I'll show how to set up some of the effects. The M1's filters don't have resonance, but I'll show how the phaser effect can be used for simulating resonance. The setups will be for the M1, but since other Korg synths have similar effects, the combination settings could be applied to other instruments. To get the most out of this video, to hear the changes that I make to a sound, I recommend listening through good headphones. Before we go into setups with complex effects, I'll show how the pipe organ was set up for the M1 demo. There's no way to pan the two oscillators left or right in patch mode, or as Korg calls it, program mode. To pan a patch in a stereo field, you'll need to go to combination mode. The new patches 47 flute stop and 51 full ranks were layered for a convincing stereo pipe organ. Set the flute stop to a level of about 51, and then the full ranks could be around 56. Then go to the pan pot page. Korg uses ratios instead of left and right values. I find it a bit confusing. To pan the sound to the left, so now it's all the way to the left. I pan the flute stop more to the left with a ratio 8:2, and then pan the full ranks with a ratio to the right with a ratio of 2:8. The patch really sounds like a stereo samples of a pipe organ. It goes way beyond the factory pipe organs. This is the pipe organ on the Korg Kronos. As I play, I can hear the sound bouncing between the left and right channels. That's okay for a techno synth patch, but this is a pipe organ. It's ridiculous. This was Korg's top workstation for a decade. I waited for years for the technology to advance for a powerful workstation, but they really didn't get many of the patches right. Besides that, last week, when I made the M1 versus the Korg Kronos 2 demo video, the Kronos froze twice with this message telling me to shut it down. I wouldn't trust this instrument to play a gig. So if you wonder how Off the Matrix got started, it was from the shortcomings of modern equipment. But I would just be fine playing my old Korg and Yamaha synths at gigs. Well, I wouldn't want to take my Lambda out just because I'd be afraid to scratch its beautiful wood finish. I should mention the technique that I used for some of the M1 patches came from designing FM DX7 patches. For example, this is a log drum patch. You might think it's just a log drum sample, but the M1 doesn't have log drum samples. I made the patch much the way I would on the DX7. The first oscillator is a sine wave. I'll turn off the second oscillator so you can just hear it by itself. I noticed that many of the M1 factory patches sounded muffled because the filter cut too much of the high frequencies. The Korg sound designers used the filter to make the tone duller with velocity, but they overdid it. Besides that, many of the samples were a bit dull to begin with. This is the Vibes patch. The M1's vibe sample was a bit duller than vibes on other synths like the D70, so the last thing I wanted to do was to cut off the high frequencies with a filter. I remembered how I programmed the vibes on the DX7 with a sine tone for the mellow body and a second tower for the brighter overtones. That way the tone can get softer and then brighter with the velocity without sounding muffled. This is another one that uses the same method, the raw karimba. This is one of my favorites. This patch uses the EX samples, so it's only in the EX version. I'll go back to the Good Vibes patch. It has a nice tremolo. I used the M1's tremolo effect for the tremolo. The settings of the effect came from duplicating the analog tremolo I used on the Korg Lambda chimes. This is a new patch that duplicates the chimes of the Lambda. It's really close to the original, but since the effects are applied to all the patches in combination, if you use this tremolo in a multi-timbral setup, it will affect everything. And that's one of the limitations of the M1. The SY77 is about the same age, but it has individual outputs for each element. But there's one way of getting tremolo without using the effect. So I'll go to the effects page, and I just turned off the tremolo. And then you go to the filter modulation. So you can use the filter modulation within setting it to an intensity of about 23 to get a nice tremolo without having the effect. So by using the filter for the modulation, you can use it in a setup with in a combination mode without having tremolo affecting the other instruments. This is a stack I did with the Trident strings and the Lambda chime. So if you just go into combination mode, just copy the sounds to that. The Trident strings is another patch that relies much on effects. That's because the original strings were from an assembly effect. If I turn off the assembly effect on the Trident, the strings is just a saw wave. So when I turn it back on, you have a rich string sound. By the way, this is the karimba that I used to program the DX7 and M1 karimba patches. String machines use this effect for their sound, but since the Trident didn't use the divide down technology, it sounded more like the saw wave on the M1. I was able to get a good emulation. I used Effect 24 Symphonic Assembly and with a modulation depth of about 80. But if you turn it off, it still sounds good. Because I detuned the saw waves a little bit, but now it sounds a bit closer to the Super JX. The JX huge strings came from copying the settings of the Super JX. It really has the warmth of the original. The first chorus effect was important to the patch because the chorus put the sound in stereo. There's no way to adjust the chorus on the JX, so I had to listen to it and adjust the mod rate and depth rate on the M1 chorus to get it close. So in the effects, I use chorus 1 with a depth of about 60 and a rather slow modulation rate of 0.57 Hertz. And I set the balance to about 40 for the effect. Another JX patch that used the chorus effect is this square patch. I I can imagine that on a song from '86, although it's in 3/4, which is less common. Well, maybe Enya. Another patch that relies on effects is the no quarter patch. I can't remember how the Led Zeppelin goes, but it's pretty close. The M1 didn't have a Rhodes sample, but I overcame that. I used the second phaser effect. Oh, by the way, one thing I noticed, when I was programming these sounds, my keyboard wasn't transmitting aftertouch much. But now I realize that some of the settings have some aftertouch pitch modulation. So you can go down, if you notice that, you can just set it to 0 where it should be. But for the effects, I used the second phaser, a modulation intensity of 99, or manual to 99, and a pretty fast rate of 7 Hertz. And that gives you that kind of psychedelic. That's more like for a psychedelic effect. The M1's filters don't have resonance, but I'll show how the phaser effect can be used for simulating resonance. The patch OBXA Pad was inspired by the patch on the Oberheim Matrix 6. I set the LFO on the M1 to modulate the pitch up and down an octave to sound like an arpeggiator. The frequency of the mod will set the tempo. With a setting of 57, the tempo is about 111.7 beats per minute. I was able to sync it pretty close to a sequencer. I thought of calculating the frequency rate of the LFO for different tempos on the M1 and DX7, but that would take a lot of time and I don't know if anybody would find it useful. Anyway, although the M1 doesn't have filter resonance, which is characteristic of techno, there's a way of getting over that limitation. I used a slow filter modulation rate to open and close the filter. When the patches run through the second phaser effect, it sounds like resonance. And this is how it would sound without the effect. So I'll turn it off. Now turn it back on. It really makes a difference. You really have to hear it with headphones too. I recommend headphones. And I'll show how I set the phaser. It's a pretty slow rate of modulation. The phaser effect can be copied to other patches to emulate filter resonance. I'll play the OBXA poly patch with the arpeggiator on the EX5, and this is without the effect, but I can use the filter cutoff. Now I'll copy the effect. Let's see. So it's using a chorus effect just then. So I'll copy the effect from the OBX pad. Okay, so this should be the pad with the effect. Yeah. So I can change. So that's, something I think you may not expect the M1 could do. The patch I played for the intro was the OBXA pad layered with the patch 7th wave, which adds a harmonic complexity because a delayed oscillator plays a fifth above the root pitch. I didn't want the arpeggiator-like modulation effect for the whole layer. So to limit the key range, I only assigned it for the lower end. So that way I could play the middle C, say. and it'll only be the 7th wave patch. To do that, you go into Edit, and here you can set the low range. This is where I have the arpeggiator patch is only going up to D sharp 3. So that way I can play melodies in the higher range. And then I pan the elements. I say elements, I'm so used to SY99. I pan the 2 patches, the one more onto the left and then the other one to the right. And for this setup, remember to go to the effects and to copy the effects from the patch 98 to it to get that phaser-like effect for resonance. For the M1 demo video, I played the patch Space Probe in a combination setup. This is the patch by itself. To get the sound in the Space Probe demo, I layered it in a combination with 2 other patches, the patch 20 Leviathan and the patch 23 Mixed Choir. And then that'll give you this epic sound. Last, I'll cover drum setups. The M1 came out before there was a general MIDI standard, so the factory kits were not assigned for GM. A few GM compatible kits are in the new bank. The M1 has an advantage over other synths of the era, like the SY77, because the decay can be set for the individual drum samples. That was really helpful because I didn't like the closed hi-hat much on the M1, but there was an open hi-hat that I was able to give a short decay to use it for a closed hi-hat. I noticed the difficulty here by me playing, but the closed hi-hats don't cut off the open hi-hats as they should on the drum machine. So patch 49 was set up so that the closed hi-hats will cut off the open hi-hat. But the hats are only assigned to their ranges as they would be in a GM kit from F sharp to A sharp. To use the custom hi-hat set with the rest of the kit, go to a combination mode. Again, copy the effects from one of the kits. Drums are usually on MIDI channel 10, so set 3 kits on the last 3 channels. That way the first 5 channels will be free to use later for other patches. So what you want to do is set the assignments. For the bottom range, you can leave the first kit at C-1, and then the last kit would start with the toms on B2. You'll need to set the top ranges. So for the first kit, set the top range to F2, and then for the second kit's top range, it would be to the range of the open hi-hat, and then the last kit can be left to cover G9, which is the rest of the range. The nice thing about this setup is now you can mix the ranges of the different kits. So now I have the T drums playing for the snare. But I can go into change the patch. So 39 is the T kit, but if I go to 29, this gives me a house kit where I have the whip for the snare. And it changes the kick. It's a shame that Korg didn't have Mr. T promoting their synths. This was a long tutorial. I hope it gives you an idea of the amount of work that went into these patches. When I say I developed the patches off and on over a period of 20 years, I'm not kidding. So until next time, take care.